Family drama. Some of you might have a little bit of family drama. And I am sure whether it be your own family, maybe your relatives, maybe close friends, you're just aware that many families have drama. Now, some have less, and you can be thankful if you have less drama. Some have more. And some have sometimes crazy drama. And it's hard to even explain why this drama happens. Now, I think I've shared a few times before, I've gotten into Korean dramas more. And especially after going to Korea this summer for the first time in a long time, there's something about the emotional resonating that happens when you just kind of see others who are going through drama. And I thought about this. If there were an Olympics for drama, I think Koreans would get gold medal. I mean, it's just the craziest stories that happen. And if you do some study of the history of Korea, you'll see that there's just a lot of drama throughout their history. And so it's not a surprise that while it can never be a justification for sinful activity or sinful attitudes or sinful words, you can understand that there's this backdrop of drama that actually does affect a lot of people. So when you look at the life of Joseph, one of the major backdrops is that of family drama. And last week I talked a little bit about the sort of the prequel, I called it, the patriarchal story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that there was so much drama with each of them. Now, as we get into Genesis 37 with the story of Joseph, I just want to give a little bit of immediate context, at least several chapters leading into it. In chapter 33, Jacob and Esau are reconciled. Right? And then you jump over to Genesis 36, you see the genealogy of Esau given. And so while we don't, of course, have all of the story, we know that at one point in time, when Jacob stole not only the birthright, but the blessing that belonged to Esau, Esau wanted to kill him. Like his own brother wanted to kill him. So years later, they are reconciled. But you can imagine how much impact that must have made on Jacob. I mean, he was fearful when they were leaving Laban and traveling back to Canaan. He was fearful when they entered into the land of Esau. Why? Because he wasn't sure if his brother still was angry at him. Now, I know family dramas that happen with different people, and a lot of times it's sibling drama. Right? And you don't know. There's a severe break in the relationship. And so you don't know if that will ever get resolved, if that will ever get reconciled. So after years, they are finally reconciled. But then in Genesis 34, Dinah, who is the daughter of Jacob and Leah, they are near a place called Shechem, and she is actually violated by Shechem, who's the name of the son of Hamor, the Hivite. And because of that, Simeon and Levi murder all the men of the city. Now, I mentioned this a little bit before. It's one thing to murder at all. It's another thing to murder an entire city. So when we talk about these brothers of Joseph, they're not just kind of, shady characters. I mean, these are vile. These are just hateful. These are violent men. I mean, if they had absolutely no hesitation to kill an entire city of men, you're not surprised later when they say they want to kill Joseph too. In Genesis 35, God tells Jacob to go to Bethel, and that's where he had his original dream or vision of the angels going up and down from heaven. He returns to that place, and God blesses him. He gives him a new name. No longer are you Jacob, you are Israel. And it kind of points back to when Abraham, he was previously called Abram. God gives him a new name, Abraham. Jacob is given this name Israel, which means God prevails. Tells him that a nation and an assembly of nations will come from him. Kings would descend from him. And the land which had been promised to Abraham and Isaac is also going to be given to him and his descendants. So that's kind of a high point for Jacob. Right after going through all this drama, he goes back to the place where God spoke to him, and God now reaffirms the covenant. Just as he leaves Bethel on the way to Ephrath, Rachel, who is pregnant, goes into severe labor. She gives birth to their second son. Joseph is the first son of Jacob and Rachel. Gives birth to Benjamin, but she dies. Now, when you read that, we just read it, someone dies. It's almost like nothing really, it doesn't do much for us. We just hear someone dies. But if you as a husband had your wife die, how would it affect you? I mean, he's already had a messy life. He loved Rachel. He wanted to marry Rachel, but Laban deceived him, tricked him into marrying her older sister Leah. And it's ironic because Jacob, who was the deceiver, now has been deceived, but in not a small way. He's deceived into marrying someone. I mean, guys, think about that. That's crazy. I mean, what would that do to you? To have someone deceive you into marrying someone that you had absolutely no intention of marrying. And the one that you do marry, and the one that you do want to marry, Rachel, she is barren. She's not able to have children. And because of that, she gives over her maidservant to Bilhah. Says, I want you to have children through her. That adds another wife. Now there's 3. I mean, imagine Jacob. I just can't imagine how he woke up every day and thought, so what do I do today? Who do I say hi to first? I mean, who am I going to eat breakfast with? There's so many things I wonder, how did it work? I mean, we don't know. And then because Leah stops having children, she gives her maidservant Zilpah. So now he has 4. But Rachel now dies. I mean, I've thought about this many times. If Angela ever died, I don't know what I'd do. Back in Maryland days, when he just moved to Maryland, and the streets there make no sense where we lived, Columbia. They just went all over the place, and it was green everywhere. There are just trees everywhere. And then there were circles, and the street sign says the same thing. So one day she goes to the market, and she doesn't come back for 3 hours. The market, it's only like 5 minutes away. And this is back before the days of cell phones and all that. So I am just, in my mind, imagining the worst. She's crashed into a ditch, she's dying, and I have no way of knowing. When she finally comes back, and I'm like, what happened? She goes, I went into the circle, and I didn't know how to get out. Because she just saw the same street sign over and over and over again. So I was like, I'm going to get you a cell phone. It's for my peace of mind. Because for me, I think that's something I do still fear. I don't want to see my wife die. I can't imagine Jacob. As she has just given birth, she dies. Now, it doesn't get any better after that. Because right after that, Reuben, his oldest, has an affair with Bilhah. Okay? She is technically Jacob's wife. Your firstborn, the one who has the position to carry on the family name. How could he do such a thing? I mean, it's just unbelievable. So think about what's going on in Jacob's mind. There's so much drama. They finally get to Mamre, and when Isaac is still living there, But soon afterwards, Isaac dies. I mean, it is just one thing after another. His life has been such a roller coaster. So then we get to Genesis 37. And in Genesis 37, let's look there in verse 1. It says, "Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when 17 years of age." Okay, so Joseph is introduced now at age 17. Do you remember age 17? Okay, I don't think there's anyone 17 or younger here, right? 17. That would have been, 1982 for me. 1982. I can't think that I was that mature at that time. And if someone was writing a story about my life, what I was doing when I was 17 years old, I probably would not want anyone to read it. And that's one of the things about Scripture here. What you have imprinted actually for all of eternity in God's Word is the life story of these different individuals. So Joseph, while he's 17 years of age, he's pasturing the flock with his brothers while he's still a youth. And he's, at that particular instance, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah. Okay, so there's 4 other half-brothers at that point. And as Joseph spends time with them, he brings back an evil report or a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his sons because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a varicolored tunic. And his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers. And so they hated him and could not speak to him in peace. Now, at 17 years of age, what we see very clearly is that there is bad blood between the brothers. I mean, it's really bad. And one of the things that when you read a narrative account, one of the things you have to be careful is don't be too quick to jump to assumptions until you know the full story. You know, you see Joseph brings back an evil report. And someone might go, wow, Joseph was just a snitch. He just tattletaled. Is that what it's saying? Is that what you presume it's saying? Or maybe do you understand that it was maybe Jacob who entrusted Joseph with what was going on with the flocks? Because this goes in, this is connected to the whole idea of him having this varicolored tunic. You know, I think I have a slide. It's Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Did any of you see that? Okay, no, it's old. Okay, Angela and I went to see it, and I was like, oh, it's a Bible story. Oh, they take great liberties, artistic liberties. But one of the things they do is they put all this emphasis on how this coat was just so colorful. And we just don't know. We don't have Instagram from those days. We don't have pictures of the clothing. What we do know from the language is that it could have had different colors, but they didn't have a lot of choices like we do today. In fact, most people wore black, brown, or sort of an off-white. They didn't have bright colors unless you were like royalty. It could have meant that he had a full-length tunic, one that went to his palms and to his feet. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, back in those days, if your regular work clothing kind of came up to your knees and was sleeveless, okay, that was the typical clothing of someone who worked as a shepherd or in the fields. The person who had a full-length tunic up to his palms and up to his feet was someone who was like an overseer, a manager. So it could have very well been that Joseph was appointed by his father to be kind of the manager over the flocks and his brothers, which contributes to the idea of why his brothers don't like him so much, because he's younger than all of them, other than Benjamin. Maybe it's just Jacob saying, I need to know what's going on, because he knows the character of those sons. You see, they're not just wonderful sons who do what their father asks. We find out that these guys are really bad. They have horrible character. They're liars, they're deceivers, they're potential murderers. So it's no surprise that Jacob would want to know, and Joseph gives simply an honest report. Now, in addition to all that, it's very clear that Jacob, and he's called Israel here, it just says very straightforward in verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons. And someone might say, does that mean he was playing favorites? Absolutely, because it just says it right there. That you don't have to make any presumption. It's pretty straightforward. Was it wise for him to do that? No. I mean, any of you come from families with multiple siblings? If you had any sense that maybe mom or dad loved your sibling more, that could mess up the family dynamics a little. Now, in addition to that, James Boyce makes a very interesting observation in his commentary regarding Jacob and Joseph. In John 4, the story of the Samaritan woman at the well, it's near a place called Sychar. And John writes there that it's near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Now that's very interesting because Jacob didn't have a lot of land. In fact, the only land that had been passed down was when Abraham bought a plot of land for a cemetery site. Other than that, they had no other land. But there was something very important about saying that he had given the land to Joseph. That meant that Jacob had Joseph to be his heir. He's giving him the property rights. So how do you think the brothers feel about that? I mean, all the older ones, other than Benjamin, have been passed over. No wonder they don't like Joseph so much. Now, one more thing to add. In Genesis, when Joseph, and this is where he is facing Potiphar's wife, it gives this description of Joseph. He was beautiful in form and beautiful in appearance. It means Joseph, he looked pretty good. And he was pretty cut up. And he was someone that people looked at and they're like, wow. Both men and women will go, wow. He looks good. But he didn't just get that on his own. In Genesis 29:17, it uses the same description of Rachel. Rachel was beautiful in form and beautiful in appearance. So it's clear that Joseph, in many ways, took on the kind of features that reminded Jacob of Rachel. Now, again, imagine Jacob, Rachel is dead, as he watches Joseph growing up and sees that he really resembles Rachel. He can't help but be reminded of her constantly. So no wonder he loves Joseph so much. But it still doesn't excuse partiality in any way or favoritism. Now, on a side note, as a parent, if you have multiple children, there could be one child that's more challenging than the others to love. And if you respond in a worldly way, you might show partiality. But if you are exercising the love of Christ, you're not going to give room for partiality.
But what we can see here is that Jacob has his weaknesses, his flaws. And I think we have to remember that. Who are we to judge Jacob when we ourselves have our flaws, our weaknesses? Isn't it interesting that people would be so critical of someone and maybe they have an issue that you don't have, but that gives you the right to think somehow more highly of yourself than them? No. None of us are justified in thinking highly of ourselves. In fact, if anything, we should look and read these stories and see that there's a very real picture being presented of the humanity of these characters. Jacob was very human. And somehow, even in his faults and weaknesses, God is providentially working to orchestrate good. Even in Joseph's brothers, who are evil men, they even acknowledge it later on that they did evil things. God uses even their intention for evil and turns it into good. Now Joseph, and this is the first point, I've already been going over it. He is the favored one. Joseph is favored. And he enjoys that role. Remember, back in those days, they didn't have various changes of clothing. That's why later on, when Joseph gifts Benjamin multiple sets of clothing, that's kind of a big deal. He kind of had like one thing to wear. Maybe two, right? I don't know. Maybe you had to I didn't know how they dealt with underwear or undergarments at the time, but maybe you just had to wash it once in a while. But they didn't have multiple sets of clothing. So Joseph is wearing this very colored, multicolored, maybe it's this linen tunic that's fancy. But if there's one thing that garment reminds the brothers of, it's that Dad loves Joseph more than all of us. That's what it represents. You must wonder, like every day when they saw Joseph, what were they thinking? Well, it tells you what they're thinking. They want to kill him. Now, then Joseph has some dreams. Okay, look at chapter 37, verse 5. It says, then Joseph had a dream. Okay, now again, as a 17-year-old and you have a dream, he tells it to his brothers, so they hated him even more. Why? Because this is the dream. And he said to them, please listen to the dream which I have had. Indeed, behold. S. Lewis Johnson, I've been listening to some sermons, and anytime you see the word behold, okay, it's the reflection of someone who's kind of excited about sharing something. Like, behold! Like, behold the speaker! I want you to look at the speaker, right? Or behold, look at the exit sign. It doesn't matter what it is. It's, I want to bring attention to it. So imagine 17-year-old Joseph saying, behold, I have a dream. I had a dream. What was his dream? We were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, again, so another behold. It's almost like he can't help himself. Yo, listen to this. Whoa! Behold. My sheaf rose up and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. Now you read that and you're like, what's a sheaf? That's not even relevant to us, right? Well, back in the days, it's agricultural society, right? They harvest, they gather things together. So there's a sheaf of grain. And Joseph is saying, mine stood up. And the rest of yours bowed down to mine. Now, they didn't need an interpreter for this dream. The brothers knew exactly what he was saying. You guys are bowing down to me. Now, any of you with younger siblings, okay, if they happen to be here, don't point them out. But imagine your younger sibling saying, I had a dream that you bowed down and worshiped me and served me. You might just go up and slap them in the face, right? What are you talking about? How dare you think that could even be something possible? I mean, his brothers respond by saying they hated him even more. Look at verse 8. Then his brothers said to him, "Are you really going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then you get to verse 9. Then he had another dream. You'd think Joseph might want to stop somewhere and go, "I think they're mad." No, he goes, "Hey guys, hey bros, I had another dream." And he recounted it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have had still another dream, and behold," okay, so there's another double behold. It's like, yo, look at this. I had another dream. And again, look. The sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. Now again, they didn't need an interpreter. Who's he talking about? Jacob, Leah, and the 11 brothers. Now, even Jacob is like, whoa. What's going on here? Verse 10. And he recounted it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers really come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground?" So Jacob's saying, okay, it doesn't work this way. You really saying that your mother and I are going to bow down to you? And his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the saying in mind. And that's an interesting phrase there. Yes, he rebukes him, but he's kind of thinking about this. Jacob's thinking, well, where is this all going? I mean, well, why is he having this dream? Well, what we really understand, though, is this. His brothers hate him. They're jealous of him. Now, it wasn't Joseph's fault that he had these dreams. In fact, what we understand, and again, that's why you have to read the whole story and understand the picture. These dreams actually came from God, and they were actually fulfilled. Because we see later on when Joseph is in Egypt and he sees his brothers come, and it says that they bowed down on the ground before him. And it says, Joseph remembered his dream. Now, some have said that, well, Joseph was kind of dumb for saying all this stuff. Again, how do you jump to that so quickly? He might have been naive. He maybe could have used a little more discretion in how he shared these things. Instead of saying, "Behold, behold, behold, behold," he could have just cut out the beholds. Maybe he could have even thought, should I share this dream or not? He's 17 years old. But the brothers, what we see is a continued revealing of their character. 3 times it says that they hated him. Verse 4, they hated. Verse 5, they hated him even more. Verse 8, they hated him even more. How do you keep hating more and more and more? I mean, how is it that you could hate someone at all? I mean, it's not just to say, like, I hate you. It's saying, I hate you, and I hate you exponentially. And I will keep hating you more and more and more. Their hatred is so irrational. It's so unreasonable. I mean, think about it. Was it Joseph's fault that he was born to Rachel? Was it Joseph's fault that he was beautiful in form and appearance? Was it Joseph's fault that he was responsible, reported back to his father what his father asked him to do? No, the real issue is that they were sinners. And they were murderers in their heart. Jesus talks about that kind of thing, right? In Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 says, "You have heard that the ancients were told, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be guilty before the court.' But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court, and whoever says to his brother, Raca, shall be guilty before the Sanhedrin, and whoever says, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. You know, the religious leaders of Jesus' day, they thought they were superior to everyone, when in fact their hearts were filled with sin. You know, just because you technically don't murder someone doesn't mean that you are good. Murder starts in the heart. I mean, it's revealed in the things that you would say. Joseph's brothers revealed in their thoughts and their heart attitudes, their words, and it even says that they plotted to kill him because he had some dreams. I mean, if your sibling came and said, I had a dream, you're like, I'm going to kill you. I mean, some people joke around like that, but these guys are serious. Joseph was not the problem. In fact, anytime you try to blame someone else for your issues, all you're doing is avoiding the truth of where you're at. You see, in 1 John chapter 2, verse 9, it says, the one who says he is in the light and yet hates his brother is in the darkness until now. Joseph's brothers were in the dark. 1 John 2:11, but the one who hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness and does not know where he is going because the darkness blinded his eyes. 1 John 3:15, everyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. 1 John 4:20, if someone says, I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For the one who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. What Joseph's dreams revealed was just the murderous intent of his brothers. They couldn't stand the idea that someone would even say they had a dream that they bowed down to him. But their hate and envy didn't start there. It had already been a part of who they were. Go to verse 12. And here we see the scene set up for Joseph to get betrayed. Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said to him, I will go. Then he said to him, go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Now, if you remember Shechem, that happened just a few chapters before. That's the place where Simeon and Levi massacred all those men. So you might understand why Jacob is saying to Joseph, I want you to go check on your brothers, because they made his name odious, right? Jacob's family now is known for being murderers. So it makes sense that Jacob would want to make sure they're doing okay. What seems to be a little strange is, why would you send a 17-year-old about 34 miles away on his own? I mean, that part, it's hard for me to imagine. Imagine sending your youngest kid to go check on all your older kids, miles and miles away, to a place where it's right where Simeon and Levi had murdered all those men. But what we do know is this: because we know the whole story, God is providentially working through every step. He is working through Jacob, telling Joseph, go to Shechem, check on your brothers. It's all part of the story. Joseph simply says, I will go. You know, we can, I think, assume, because the Bible says all have sinned, that he was a sinner too. He was not perfect. But what we don't see in the whole storyline, we don't see anything about his character that's really negative. We for sure see it in his brothers. Joseph really must have loved his father. He obeyed his father. He honored his father. He did what his father asked him to do, even if it seemed a little unreasonable. We just see Joseph saying, I will go. I will do what you ask, Father. Now, as he goes to Shechem, he doesn't see them there. He finds someone, and this guy tells him, oh, I heard that they're going over to Dothan. So as he is heading over to Dothan, his brothers see him from a distance. They see him from a distance. I mean, it doesn't give details. Maybe it was the garment. Maybe it was they just could see that it was Joseph. But as soon as they recognize that it was him, what are they wanting to do? Verse 18. And they saw him from a distance, and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. Then they said to one another, here comes this dreamer. So now come and let us kill him and cast him into one of the pits, and we will say, a wild beast devoured him. Then let us see what will become of his dreams. Now it's very interesting there that Reuben enters the story in verse 21. He hears this and he delivers Joseph out of their hands. That's his intention, at least. Let us not strike down his life. Reuben further said to them, shed no blood, cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not put forth your hand against him, that he might deliver him out of their hands to return him to his father. It seems at first glance that Reuben is wanting to do something that sounds noble. But remember just a couple chapters before, what had he done? He'd had an affair with Bilhah. Is he trying to redeem himself? Is he trying to reclaim his birthright? Who knows? We don't know. But what we do know is this. Even though he does this, and his intention maybe is good, he didn't say a word when they go back. He didn't say anything to Jacob. He doesn't tell him the truth of what happened. For some reason, Reuben is not on the scene. Judah sees some traders going by and says, you know what? We shouldn't kill our brother. He's our flesh and blood. Let's sell him, make some money. They sold him for 20 shekels. 20 shekels of silver was the amount someone paid for a slave that was handicapped. That's how low they thought of him. We'll just at least get some minimal profit. Joseph is now on his way to Egypt. Even though Joseph is treated this way by his brothers, again, what we see is his brothers are surely horrible people. It says they take off his tunic. I can't imagine they're gentle about it. Might have thrown a few jabs, some kicks. Then they throw him into a pit with no water. They want to torture him. And they sell him. But before that, after they throw him into a pit, and jump over to, let's see, where is it? Verse 25. It says, and they sat down to eat a meal. Okay, that is such a strange thing to imagine that you could do all that and then just sit down and have lunch. These brothers have no conscience. They want to kill their brother. They tear off his robe. They throw him into a pit. And they eat lunch. Years later, when they're in Egypt, and when they get in trouble with Joseph, they don't know he's Joseph. Their first response is, do you remember when our brother was pleading to us for his life? That's an interesting thing to remember 20-something years later. So they did have a conscience. One thing that you can only imagine, Joseph, as he is being dragged to Egypt, what do you think he was thinking? He has just been betrayed by his own brothers. They've sold him.
He's 17 years old. I mean, I don't care what part of the world you are. That's pretty bad. That's pretty rough. It would have been so easy to understand that he would be embittered, resentful, angry, despondent. He could have responded in so many different ways, but we don't see any of that. Now, what do they do after they sell him? Well, then Reuben comes back and says, what are we going to do? In verse 29, then Reuben returned to the pit. Behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he tore his garments. Then he returned to his brother and said, the boy is not there. As for me, where am I to go? So he's at a loss. So what do the brothers do? They took Joseph's tunic, slaughtered a male goat, and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they sent the varicolored tunic and brought it to their father and said, we found this. Please recognize it, whether it is your son's tunic or not. And he recognized it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. Then all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son. So his father wept for him. We see how evil these brothers are because they don't stop. They have to come up with a plan, and the plan is to deceive their father. I mean, how do you go this far? Where you slaughter a goat, okay? And S. Lewis Johnson makes an interesting comment here. He says, when Jacob, with his mother's help, Rebekah, deceived Isaac, it involved a goat. She prepared a goat into the kind of meal that Isaac really loved. Again, a goat is being used to deceive. But I really wonder, how could they in good conscience look at their father, tell him the story, they see him torn apart, and then it says they try to comfort him. How do you comfort someone that you deceived? How? I mean, this is how messed up this whole situation is. You just made up this complete lie that your father's most loved son, which you were jealous of, which you were resentful of, you were bitter, but you are passing off that he is possibly torn up by wild animals. How could you deceive your own father? I mean, that's why there's so much drama going on here. How do you wake up each day and look at Jacob? It says that he mourned for many days, that he wept, and he refused to be comforted. And I can't remember which commentator it was, but they said it went from referring Jacob as Israel, and then it goes back to Jacob. There's something about the very core of who Jacob is. Now it's no longer reflecting God prevails, Israel. What prevails in his life now? Sorrow, mourning. And he is letting this now control his life. You see, it's no surprise that Jacob always had suspicions about his sons throughout the whole storyline. In fact, later on, when they need to go get grain during the famine, there's a reason he doesn't send Benjamin with him. He doesn't trust them. He doesn't trust them for decades. And for good reason. Can you imagine somewhere down the line, and it must happen when Joseph is revealed that he's alive, the whole story has to come out. How did they sustain a lie for decades? Well, the last part of the story here in chapter 37 is the last verse, verse 36. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him to Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. Multiple commentaries note it is God's providence that the trading route went down south to Egypt. It's God's providence that Joseph was sold to Potiphar. He could have been sold to anyone. He could have been sold to just be a common field working slave. Instead, he is sold to Potiphar, who happens to be Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. He is kind of like the head of the Secret Service. He is pretty up there. He's an important guy. So while all this is happening back home, Joseph ends up in the house of Potiphar. And we don't see much yet, but what we do know is, again, there is no mention of Joseph responding in a bad way. In fact, as we go on through the story of Joseph, what we're going to see is that there is a continuing pattern of the fact that he sees God at work in his life every step of the way. And he trusts him. And again, remember, he doesn't have a Bible. He doesn't have any written testimony. All he has is what's been passed down to him from Jacob. Maybe he got to hear some from Isaac. He got to hear the promises that were made to Abraham. He heard the stories of Adam and Eve in the garden. We don't know how much he knew, but what he did know, he trusted God. And I think that's why the story of Joseph for me is so compelling. Sometimes I think I have a hard life, their challenges, their difficulties, and I think, if I compare myself to Joseph, it's not that bad. But the point isn't to compare how hard things are. The real main point is, how do you respond? How do you respond when life gets hard? When sometimes things that are just unimaginable happen? I'm sure that many of you have family trials and struggles. Maybe you've had church struggles, betrayals, hurts. We have an opportunity to show whether we will trust the Lord or will we respond badly, like the brothers of Joseph. Yes, people have faults. People even sin against people. But does that give you justification for evil in your own heart? Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in Yahweh with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight." That wasn't written yet. But Joseph is living it. He's not leaning on his own understanding. And as we see later in the story, when Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, his response is, "How could I do this great evil before God?" He is so conscious of God's presence in his life. It's not even about Potiphar's wife. It's about, I don't want to sin against God. I think one of the things that really boggles me is, how does a 17-year-old live like that and respond to being betrayed and sold by his own brothers? Do you still go back and quote Proverbs 3:5-6? We have that. We have the treasures of God's word to help us
see and understand, and to learn from the examples that have gone before us. Joseph, yes, he's young, but he's on this trajectory that continues to have a pattern that says he fears God, he loves God, he trusts God every step of the way. My hope and challenge as we go through this series is that you will consider, how do you respond when you are put to the test? Do you show grace under fire? Or when you are put to the fire, does it reveal something about your heart? That there's anger, even murderous thoughts, or maybe other things that are inside you already. And it's not because someone did something to you to cause it. It's just that something happens to reveal it. I'm just going to bow your heads as we prepare for communion.